call to order this public hearing of Knox County Commission for Monday, June 5th, 2023. The purpose of this hearing is for discussion and public input on the proposed fiscal year 24 budget. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Lundy.
Here.
Commissioner Darrett.
Here.
Commissioner Oster. Commissioner Ward.
Here.
Commissioner Schoonmaker.
Here.
Commissioner Hill. Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Beeler.
Here.
Commissioner Daly. Commissioner Jay.
Here.
Commissioner Frazier. All 11 members are present.
We do have a quorum. We have one individual signed up for public forum. That is Director Caldwell. Sir, if you would please, you can sit there, or if you would prefer to use the podium, you can do that as well.
If I can sit here and it works, it'd be great.
All right.
Thank you all for being here and allowing me a chance to speak. I'm going to go over the changes related to the proposed revised budget that you have that goes along with the amendments from Friday, to one related to the Sheriff's Office and one related to the county employee raise as well. And so I thought it may be best to start in your proposed revised book on page, get to that, 6, which is basically our budget summary page. And so the general fund budget has increased from has increased by $5,375,000. So that went from a total of $216,978,020 to $222,353,020. That is related to the two amendments that you all were sent separately. The one that is related to KCSO, that amendment was $3,975,000. The other amendment for the general fund was $1.4 million, and that equals the change on the general fund. On that budget summary page, just to point out some things, there will be no change in the following funds. There were no changes in governmental library, solid waste. No, solid waste is the same. Air quality, I just can't read where I am. So governmental library, air quality, hotel, motel tax, central cafeteria, and general purpose school funds. So those funds are unchanged. The remaining funds are changed, and those changes are all in salaries and benefits. And that's important to know. So as you go back through these pages and you get to the expenditure summary by fund, you will see all those changes, but they're relative to the salary increases that were sent to you on Friday, be it either the KCSO one or the one for the other county employees. I thought it may be important also to touch on how the amendments are being paid for. We often get asked from a funding standpoint, where did this come from? So as an example, how do you have this money now, and why didn't you have this money 3 months ago or a month ago when this was presented? So I'd like to touch on that a little bit, and we'll start more related to the KCSO amendment. So if you're going through the amendments, we talked about revenue sources. I think it's important to note this. Anytime that you're putting together a budget document, you're really putting together at a point in time, right? And so for us, a lot of our revenues are collected in arrears. So as we are projecting local option sales tax as an example, oftentimes we are projecting and estimating and projecting 18 months in the future. Some other revenue sources that we'll touch on, they come in sporadically, and you don't really know what you have until maybe the mayor's already made his budget proposal. So we'll get into some of those and maybe shed some light on how we have a more clear picture now than what we would have had when we presented a budget to you back at the beginning of May. One of the increases related to the First Amendment was state inmate money, $1,250,000. That increase, state inmate revenue, when we created this budget, we only had revenue through December. That revenue fluctuates on the number of prisoners. So we proposed a budget of $2 million based off the revenue that we had at that point. After the budget proposal in May, we received a large payment of nearly $1.4 million related to state inmate money. After discussions with Allison Rogers, the finance director for the sheriff, and recent trends, we were comfortable raising that revenue to $3.25 million. A small portion of this is related to, we think we can do some lobbying efforts with the state to get the increase of the state inmate money, which currently sits at $41. The federal rate for state inmate money is $83. So we want to have a conversation with the state about raising state inmate money, but we did not project a lot of money into this. The vast majority of that increase just relates to recent trends and inmate money that we had saw the last 3 months. You saw an adjustment on there related to what we call OTAs paid out. That is what we call other state adjustments through the appeals process, where the state will make adjustments to property tax payments after they've been through the appeals process here. We started to budget this a few years ago. Some of you will remember this. The state approved large payouts for big box stores, so we started to put a budget in place for OTAs, which is a negative revenue for our purposes. Based on the data through May, we're now comfortable lowering those payouts by $250,000. We have saw a steady decrease in the amount of OTAs paid out, so we were comfortable with that number. Delinquent taxes is the next one I'll focus on. So that's delinquent property taxes. From a timing perspective, this revenue source is like the state inmate revenue. When budgeting, timing is difficult on the two types of revenue codes. So just for your purposes, we have a delinquent that is less than a year and a delinquent that is greater than a year. We based our original numbers on historical data, but we've exceeded those amounts in the past few years, so we made an adjustment to increase that delinquent amount by $500,000. Business tax. So I mentioned a minute ago about how certain revenue sources are hard to project. This first line will give you an instance here. Business tax. Nearly 80% of this revenue source is received from April the 20th through the end of the fiscal year. So think about that. As we were doing budget projections, you really have no idea. You're basing it on historical data. Once we got the May revenue, we were comfortable adjusting this revenue source. We are really, and this comes through the county clerk's office. So we are more comfortable now in moving this revenue number up because the vast majority of those collections happen in May. That's when the big payment comes in, and that's at the end of May. So we basically got that 2 weeks ago. Interest income. So what is interest income? That is our banking contract, and so we have a banking contract with First Bank. Our banking contract is tied to Fed funds, and we get Fed funds plus 15 basis points. So as the Feds have raised interest rates, our revenue has increased in this fund. For example, we budgeted $1.25 million in fiscal year 2022, but only received $820,000. In FY23, we budgeted $1.45 million, that's current year, but to date have already received $4.1 million in this revenue source. As you can see, we have a lot of room in this revenue account. We went up to $5 million in this budget proposal. I'm not really comfortable in going higher than that. If you say to me, well, Chris, will we receive money in excess of that $5 million? I would sit here and tell you, yes. I think this coming fiscal year, we may get $8 to $10 million in interest income based off what we've gotten the last two months because feds have increased interest rates. Here's the concern of that, though. What happens when the feds start to reduce interest rates? And you have to reduce that revenue source, right? So I think $5 million is a good place to be, knowing you're going to have some growth, and it gives us some flexibility on those other accounts. It is a recurring revenue source, but it is volatile because it is tied to interest rates. And while we don't anticipate the feds to reduce interest rates for the next year or so, I think $5 million from 1.45 where we stand is a good place to be. So then if you go on over to the other amendment, which was related to the 2% raise for county employees, I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. So Fund 131, that source of revenue, $200,000, is related to mineral severance tax. As we projected this budget, we had only gotten in one quarter's worth of mineral severance tax. We made a projection. To date, we have exceeded that number, and we have room here to go up in mineral severance tax. I would say this because I talked to Commissioner Skemaker this morning. There's no doubt that this commission said that mineral severance tax had to go for paving. That will still be the case. We will move the other revenue source back to salaries and benefits. Solid waste amendments, $22,500. We feel like that we have room just from historical data on the sale of recycled material. Public Libraries Fund, $170,000. You see there the revenue source is transfer. That is a transfer from hotel motel tax. So we have budgeted very conservatively on hotel motel tax. We are confident that money is there, and it pays for the East Tennessee History Center, which is a county-owned facility that is related to tourism. General fund, that revenue source, we use designated fund balance, and I'm going to tell you why we use designated fund balance. We could have increased interest income by $1.4 million to have paid for this in the FY24 budget. But as I said before, we don't want to raise that number above $5 million. We're confident we're going to end the year in a positive place with revenues above budget, so we would prefer to take that from designated fund balance and allow ourselves to grow into that number as we head into FY25. So that is why that is from a designated fund balance code and not from a revenue code. That is kind of a summary of where we are. The total budget, if you look at it from a gross budget standpoint, so I grabbed the wrong book, is now $1,050,186,060. We do feel like that we also are in a good spot from a revenue standpoint, and that's why we were able to make these adjustments. It's always easy to sit back and second guess yourself on what you could have done back then versus now. I could sit here and just blame Jennifer for not telling me to budget higher, but I won't. Ultimately, like I said, it's a point in time. So we get to a place now in this where we're closer to the end of the fiscal year and have a better understanding of where we're going to end. And I think that's why we are comfortable with this revised proposed budget that is before you. I'll answer any questions that I can if you all have any, and we can go from there.
Commissioners, any questions for Director Caldwell? I don't see any. Commissioners, I do see some other department heads in the audience, so I will move to our next agenda item, which is to receive input from them or to offer any questions or discussion. So feel free to turn your light on at any time. Seeing none. Any discussions? Director Caldwell?
If I may, just in closing, before, I guess we get to our vote, whether it's at 5:30 or directly after this, I'd like to make, if you're okay with this, just some personal comments that kind of relate to this budget process that I think is important. And this weekend, Jennifer worked a lot more than I worked, so I give her all the credit for that. And putting this document back together to get to you, you know, we are really blessed with a team in the finance department that I think is second to none. They always make me look good, but it's really not me, and you all should know that. Also, I think it's important to note that the process of a budget and the sausage being made is always interesting because you only see the finished product, right? And so it's important to know things that happen behind the scenes as we work toward a budget that is basically a proposal, right? And so I would just say that this process is often difficult. It's made by everyone being engaged. I'd like to thank each of you for your professionalism and thoughtful questions throughout this process. Most of the time, you aren't aware of what we are doing behind the scenes, but once explained, you're grateful and you're understanding. Each of you don't often know, because you're not allowed to know, all the conversations that happen from between me or Jennifer and each of you, right? And so, give you some examples if that's okay. I'm going to start over here to my left with Commissioner Lundy first. She took a CTAS budgeting course so she can take my job, which is perfectly fine. Seriously though, that means a lot to us, and it helps you to look at a budget differently and more thorough. And we always like input and questions. And I know sometimes you all feel like if you call us, you're bothering us. That is not even the case. We like questions. Sometimes we may not have the answers right away, but it's perfectly fine. I'm going to skip you. I'm going to save you for last. I'm going to go to Commissioner Oster and Commissioner Frazier now, because both of you hammered me, and it's okay. I appreciate your hard questions that you asked me during the budget workshop. You make the process better by making me and all of us think about the decisions that we make. I also appreciate your advocacy for raises for all county employees. We often think that way, just so you all know, and so we were thinking about that ahead of time, but you advocating for that is a positive thing. Commissioner Ward, Commissioner Jay, both of you continuously advocated for a compromise between the mayor and the sheriff. I'm sure both of you made proposals to both and probably called them both and worked on them both, and they listened, and eventually they came together and came to compromise. I just think that's what's led us here today, is we get to a place of compromise. So don't think that the work you do, although it may not be accepted, isn't unnoticed. We notice it, and it's helpful, and I think that is positive. Commissioner Schoonmaker, you're always interested in the budget, and so I can't just think of one thing for you. We have numerous conversations related to the budget each and every year. This year, you had a great idea of reallocating the wheel tax more toward engineering and public works. We listened, we implemented, and it's conversations like that that make this process better. Commissioner Hill, I'm going to you next. You always advocate for your district, including a new park and community center for Hardin Valley. Kudos to you for that. Also, since you've been on the retirement and pension board, you've taken an active role in actuarial computations, and that's appreciated, and you see the impact of that. Commissioner Lee, you've always sending me texts quizzing me about the budget. and that's really good. And you're wanting to understand what we're doing, whether it's about the DA funding or the public defender funding or maintenance of effort with schools. I know that you have an interest in potentially moving more money from the school budget over to debt. Things that you don't see behind the scenes, which nobody does, is that Ron and I have a 3-year plan to get all that up over there over a 3-year period. It's tight because we have little room with maintenance of effort. What I show you as maintenance of effort, which is just a simple man's calculation, is more detailed for what Ron does, and Ron would tell you that that number is more tight than what it is currently. But listen, it's appreciated, and you make me think, and that's positive. Commissioner Beeler, he's always an advocate for fiscal responsibility and for county employees. Because of your years of experience, you often know more than I do, so I need to come to you for advice. When I think of you, I think of you getting the Gibbs Stadium done and the advancement of the pedestrian bridge. And Commissioner Daly, the first thing I think about you is litter. I don't know why that is, but that's a good thing. You're about keeping the county clean, and that often gets overlooked. But you do way more than this, and your ability to advocate for your district should be commended. And Commissioner Durrett, who's often calling me, or Chairwoman Durrett, excuse me, and advocating for things in her district, whether it be mental health or things like that, that's appreciated. She, though, has to put up with me every other Friday, and so she gets to bounce a lot of things off of me and let me bore her with accounting stuff. And so I appreciate your willingness to listen and your willingness to help us through this budget process. I'm done with kind words.
Thank you, Director Caldwell. And I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I'm pretty certain that it would be in agreement that we cannot express to you how grateful we are for you, for Jennifer, and for the rest of your team for putting this together and really making our jobs a lot easier and finding ways to work with us to help us do the things we want to do in our district. So for that, I definitely applaud you. Thank you so much. With that being said, and there are no lights on, I will look for a motion to adjourn our public hearing. We are adjourned. Our budget meeting will be at 5:30.